Sun is up over central Virginia skies. Hanover moving and the city's alive. One more hour to own this town. WRVA, never slowing down. Wake up rich and win the day. Or spend the whole day playing catch up anyway. Richmond's morning news keeps you running strong. 9 a.m. Let's roll all morning long.
It's Rich Schreier, News Radio WRVA 904 this morning. Thanks for joining us on the Voice of Virginia. We continue our conversation with our former governor and ambassador for the U.S., Jim Gilmore. Joins us on Thursdays to talk Virginia and international diplomacy. And I've been waiting for this conversation all week, sir. Thank you so much for hanging on with us. Let's get right to it. I saw this. I thought it was very interesting. As we see the ebb and flow of where the front lines are in the battle between the Russian invading forces into Ukraine and the Ukrainians that are standing there trying to fend them back. I never would have imagined, sir, in my wildest dreams that we would see Ukraine being able to strike into the heartland of Mother Russia. And they did very, very provocatively. Provocatively is not the right word. The right word is in an ambitious attack, taking on and having something get into St. Petersburg, to me is dumbfounding for me. I never would have thought Ukraine could strike back at Russia like that.
Well, look, I think what's going on is the difference between war crimes and military action. The Russians, from the very beginning, have been targeting civilians for the purpose of creating as much suffering as possible among the civilian population in Ukraine to make them break their will and surrender the country to the Russians. The Ukrainians are basically saying, this is nuts. Why should we be suffering that? And the Russians get away with it with impunity. So because of their high missile drone technology, they can now strike almost anywhere in Russia. And the news this morning is that Putin is having his major economic conference, international conference in St. Petersburg, which is his hometown, to showcase Russia's economy, which is kind of a laugh. And the Ukrainians struck St. Petersburg during the meeting, which is sending a very strong message. And by the way, it reinforces the message that Putin actually sent when he begged for a ceasefire during his military parade a couple of weeks ago in Moscow and begged the Ukrainians to not interrupt it with a drone attack. Now they've interrupted his economic conference with a drone attack in St. Petersburg. Look, here's the main thing I want to say to your listeners. The question today is, are any of these disputes or these wars going on going to be settled just with military force? And, I've been thinking about this a lot. And I don't think that in modern day you can just beat somebody with force unless you're prepared to do it the way we did in World War II and put 1 million men in there and conquer the whole country and take it over. And we're not doing that. We've entered into a war using force, but we've already agreed we're not going to use ultimate force ever. So all the Iranians have to do is just survive and hang in there, close the Strait of Hormuz, and then make this an ongoing battle. Well, likewise in Russia, frankly, I'll tell your listeners now, the Ukrainians are going to win this war. They've got superior drone capabilities. They're now striking inside Russia. The Russians can't advance. They're losing men like crazy. They can't replace them by recruitment anymore. The Russians are on the downhill slide. Now, that doesn't mean the Ukrainians aren't suffering, because they are, because of the deliberate war crimes that the Russians are doing. But in the end, force alone is not going to work for Putin. And I question whether or not the Americans are going to be able to do it with just force in Iran.
Interesting. James Mattis, General James Mattis, U.S. Marine Corps, in his book, he talked about when he worked for Barack Obama, and Barack Obama's strategy was, we're going to use drones, we're going to use missiles, but no boots in the ground. Didn't want to have boots in the ground. And for a while, militaries were thinking, okay, we just use our planes and missiles and be able to win a fight that way. And you can win a fight that way. But in order to actually hold the ground and take over, you do have to have boots in the ground. And we see that in Iran right now. They've been pummeled by the U.S. Air Force and Israeli Air Force, but with no boots on the ground. they can still stand there and be defiant and fight back. And it's interesting when you look at when you look at Russia and Ukraine right now. Putin thought his boots in the ground were going to be able to get all the way to Kyiv in a couple days. They've been stuck for so long, and now they're getting pushed back. And now you're actually threatening St. Petersburg. I mean, sir, you saw when he like you said, begged for the ceasefire during the annual parade to commemorate their victory in World War II. It was actually scaled down a bit more so than it normally is. Normally they'd have tanks and missiles and everything under the sun for their pass and review. It was so watered down. Number one, they don't have the tanks they had because they've been destroyed in Ukraine. And number two, I've read in places that it was almost in fear if we make it too big, it's too big of a target for Ukraine to be able to strike in Moscow. The fact that they had to scale down in Moscow says a lot.
Well, it says a lot. The political implications of this are that the Russian people have been persuaded that this war is justified, and it's not. They're trying to conquer another sovereign country. They think they have the right to do that, and they don't. And they don't have the military capability of doing it anymore. So they're just trying to destroy as many civilians and little girls and wives and children and all that in order to break the will of the Ukrainian people. Well, I was there, visited with them. I looked them in the eye, and they understand they're fighting for their lives, because if the Russians take over Ukraine, it's going to be a holocaust of blood by the Russians, and they're already doing it on a small scale. So anyway, I always come back to this because I have been consistent for years now talking to your listeners that I believe that Ukraine is the pivot of the 21st century. If the Russians fail, we're going to do fine. All of us are going to do fine in the 21st century. The Chinese will be probably not willing to gamble everything in Taiwan. Even the Middle East might get better. But look, you can't ignore what's going on in the Middle East. This thing has been launched. I think it's helped Israel more than it's helped the United States. And I think that was Netanyahu's goal. But now we're in it, and we've got to figure out what to do. And I just don't think that force alone is going to work. It didn't work in Vietnam. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Afghanistan, and it's not working now. But there are things that we can do. And I think there's diplomacy is not just a dirty word. I think that the international intervention by a lot of people around the world could actually bring this back to a positive solution in Iran. And I think that's the kind of approach that needs to be made by the United States, which is not today being done.
In the circles,
so there's a lot that we can do.
In the circles that you run in, and the ambassadors and that diplomatic corps that you're so familiar with, what are you hearing back from them? Because what I keep hearing back from people in intelligence that I follow is it's really hard to negotiate when you don't know who you're negotiating with. We just saw the president of Iran resign last week because he said, I'm not governing. We don't know where the Ayatollah is. We don't even know if he's in command. And we have the IRGC. What are you hearing back from diplomats? Who do I negotiate with? I'm not sure who's running the country.
Well, look, I'm not in the government at this point. I'm just taking in the information that I can obtain from all sources and then speaking to your listeners about it. But look, I think we know who we're negotiating with. I think we're negotiating with the National Guard, that National Guard organization in Iran. And I think they're calling the shots. But there are fundamental problems here. It's just not a matter of just beating somebody to death until they say uncle, because I don't think that's happening in Iran.
No.
I think what you've got to focus on is the Strait of Hormuz, which is the major economic weapon right now of Iran. I think that's one of the two things. Then the other is the nuclear approach. I have no idea how we're going to settle that. But one thing I think we're not going to do is send in the 101st Airborne to excavate it. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Well, Donald Trump had said the other day that they had agreed to have Americans go in there, remove it. Now, he didn't say whether it was military, whether it was the International Atomic Energy Commission, but he said they would be open to have Americans go in there and pull out that enriched uranium. But you're right. When you look at it, you know, I think in the short term, maybe short term is probably the better word. Strait of Hormuz has got to be the number one priority. Then the uranium, and Iran's looking at opposite. Well, you know what? That uranium is the only thing that keeps us from being wiped off the face of the earth by all of our enemies that we keep continuing to create. And right now, I can put all the pressure on the necks of the West by cutting off their oil.
Well, right. Look, the
1 minute to
the
Grim.
president's absolutely right that we can't allow the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon, and I think they were trying to do it, and I think they are trying to do it, and you can't permit that. I agree with the president completely about that. But the Strait of Hormuz is the really more powerful weapon. There is no nuclear weapon at this point, but there is a Strait of Hormuz, and as I said in a speech yesterday at the Richmond Rotary, for the long, long run here, Rich, you can't pick Iran up and move it somewhere. It is where it is, and it's going to always be in a position to influence the Strait of Hormuz and the shipping through there, unless you have a change of regime. And we're nowhere near in this war a change of regime. So this is a very complicated, troublesome problem that we're in right now. But at the end of the day, I think the Strait of Hormuz is the key. It wasn't the key until the war started, of course. Go ahead.
I only have 30 seconds. Would it be proper if I called their strangulation of the Strait of Hormuz conventional warfare?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's not nuclear warfare, but it's economic warfare.
Or
I think would be the
asymmetric, I
better
guess.
approach.
Economic warfare.
If you use troops and boots on the ground, and airplanes and tanks, that's conventional. If you use nuclear weapons, we all know what that is. But as I've said on this show before, hybrid warfare means that you use every element of national power, and that includes economic power. Well, a combination of military and economic power here is what the Iranians are doing. Can we open the strait with the U.S. Navy? Yeah. For how long? And how long can you do that? And can you do it if with new modern warfare and drone technology the Iranians have an advantage at that waterway, and that then implies has an effect on the economies across the whole world, including my pals and listeners on this radio show who are going over to the gas station tomorrow and spending $80 to fill their gas tanks. So it's a very significant Iranian power that they have. I think there are ways out of this, but I believe that military force alone is not going to work unless you completely crush the Iranian country. I don't think we've ever committed to doing that, to tell you the truth.
No, we've never said regime change. We thought maybe it would happen. The diaspora has been telling us they're going to rise up in the streets, but that hasn't happened as well. Sir, I can't wait for our conversation next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk to you next Thursday.
Anybody that wants to reach me can email me at gilmoreambassador@gmail.com.
Governor Jim Gilmore, our guest here on News Radio WRVA. Today's program is brought to you in part by